award-winning Canadian broadcast journalist with CTV Bell Media. She was the news anchor and co-host for CTV's Canada AM, a reporter for CTV News, and an anchor for CTV News Channel. And you can catch her these days on The Social, where she chatted with our author just this afternoon. Please welcome her to the stage, Miss Marcy Ian.
Books for Living, in my mind, is a masterpiece, and I haven't looked more forward to an interview ever, really. So I'm excited to introduce now Mr. Will Schwabe.
So thank you. That was the loveliest introduction. I'm really moved and grateful, and what a privilege it is to meet you.
Thank you.
And I think, as they say in Casablanca, this is going to be the start of a beautiful friendship.
So I've been stalking him on Twitter and all sorts of
we're having a
social
blast.
media. I love your book.
So yes, I mean, that's what I want to do, is I want to bring wonderful books into people's lives and into their homes. And I am a book proselytizer. I'm the kind of person who, when I read a book that I love, I really insist that every single one of my friends reads that book. And that's why I went, in some ways, into the book publishing business, because by nature, I'm a publisher. I need to make my enthusiasms public. And I always tease my brother. I have an older brother, because I call him a privater. He actually doesn't like anyone reading the books he reads. He wants them all to himself. But this book and the End of Your Life Book Club, there are many things I wanted to do, but one of them is to give people access to a wide range of wonderful titles that had spoken to me very, very deeply. And the wide range is very important. One of the things that makes me so sad when I go around and talk to people about books is very often I'll say, "What are you reading?" And someone will say, "I'm sorry, I'm reading X."
They apologize.
They apologize because they think it's not an exalted enough book, or it's not intellectual enough, or it's in a genre that I'm not going to take seriously. And I don't want anyone ever to apologize for what they're reading. If they're enjoying it and they're getting meaning from it, I think that's fantastic.
Might I just point out that Stuart Little is one of the books that is featured. So everything from Stuart Little to Ulysses to The Importance of Living to Giovanni's Room. I mean, it is such a wide array. I want to get back to your brother, your older brother, for a second. And I want to read you something from the book, because this comes from Will's brother, okay? And here's what he says. He says, "Now that my brother, sister, and I are all over 50, my brother, using a golf analogy, refers to our lives as being played on the back nine. The first 9 holes are behind us. Whatever score we've accumulated, we carry with us. Suddenly, finishing honorably and staying out of the sand traps and water hazards matter more than seeing our names on the leaderboard." I underlined that about 50 times. At 47 years of age, I underlined that about 50 times. That is amazing, but it also speaks to lessons and listening to what matters in life and taking action, all of those things. When you were writing this book, were you cognizant of that?
I was very cognizant of that. There's a great phrase I love that a friend told me. And he said to me, "You write the books you need."
Yeah.
He told me that phrase. Actually, it was funny. We had, as a publisher, a self-help author who exhibited every terrible tendency as a human being that he was attempting to cure in this self-help book. And I went to this fellow, I said, "Why is that?" And he said, "You write the books you need." And if I'd had a couple of beers, I would tell you who it is, but I won't. Now that I am in the back nine, because I hope to live to a ripe old age, but probably 108 would be pushing it, so solidly in the back nine. The idea of meaning and how to live a more meaningful life, and what does that mean? Far more than what I wanted to achieve or what I wanted to be known for, meaning. And Books for Living really is my attempt to corral the wisdom of a wide variety of books to try to help myself live more meaningfully.
Let's start with you going to school, a private school, and a kindly librarian who left books for you on a cart because she thought they'd be useful.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So this was one of the things that I took most joy in writing about in this book. I went to an Episcopal boarding school in Concord, New Hampshire, and we had the most wonderful school librarian. Her name was Miss Locke. She had time for every student. She had a hug or an encouraging word for everyone who needed it. She had great book recommendations. She also had the most amazing brownies. She was world famous for her brownies. They were incredible. And she always had those for kids, too. And she also was, as most great librarians are, a really profound psychologist and really understood people. At my school, and this was in the 70s, there had never been an out gay student or faculty member in the history of the school. And it was such a different time, as so many of us remember. This was the year that Harvey Milk and Mayor Moscone were shot in San Francisco. And as we may recall, the man who shot them would be sentenced, I think it was only to 7 years in prison on the Twinkie defense, that he had too much sugar from eating too many Hostess Twinkie cakes. This was the year that Anita Bryant launched her hateful campaign. So I was just starting to fully admit to myself that I was gay, but Miss Locke realized it about a half a beat before I did. And rather than talk to me about it, she started leaving books on the cart for me. Books like Oscar Wilde, W.H. Auden poetry, various gay-themed books. I write in the book, one day she left Our Bodies, Ourselves, which was the feminist book for women, and I suspect that wasn't left for me. I think that was for another person Miss Locke was funneling books to. But she left one day Giovanni's room, right at the start. And that's the James Baldwin novel set in Paris, about a young American man who falls in love with a young Italian man. And I really think in many ways that book saved my life, or at least saved me from a vision of a life that would have been intolerable. The scenes of David, who's our American hero, and Giovanni, walking down the streets in Paris in high spirits, throwing cherries at each other and laughing, gave me a vision of a life that I really didn't think was possible. And that was all thanks to Miss Locke. And as I was telling you earlier, Marcy, every school reunion went back to see Miss Locke. And I always told her how grateful I was, but one of my big regrets is I don't think I ever expressed it quite strongly enough. And Miss Locke died about 10 years ago of ALS. And what's so amazing, I think, is that my experience is mirrored in so many of my classmates. And I've had a little test. I've said to people, when you went back to school and saw Miss Locke, did she remember you? And I've never found a student who said that Miss Locke didn't remember them.
It's a phenomenal story. I love that story. You touched on it a little bit before about asking people what they're reading. Because we do. We go about our day and we say, how are you? We say, what are you up to tonight? All these different questions. But that one question you say can really reveal so much. And it can even bring us together. Yeah. And you've got another story about a grandmother that illustrates that so well.
Oh, that was one of my, I think, happiest stories from the End of Your Life Book Club. Is I heard from a grandmother who lived in Florida, as many grandmothers do, and she told me that she had a beloved grandson. And when he was a tiny tot, they had the most incredible conversations. He just couldn't wait to talk to grandma. But when he got to be about 10 or 11, the conversation stopped. And she would say to him, how was school? He would say, fine. Have you had dinner? Nope. What'd you do today? Nothing. And one day she decided to say to him, "What are you reading?" And her grandson said, "I'm reading The Hunger Games." So she went to the library and she got The Hunger Games and she read it. And she said that one question, "What are you reading?" totally transformed their relationship. And the very next time, when she told him where she was at the Hunger Games, and he told her what was going to happen, and he asked her this, and she asked him that, and they were no longer a grandmother pestering a grandson. They were these two readers on a journey. And that's what can happen with this amazing question, what are you reading? And I think we should ask everyone all the time. If you don't mind, one other story about that, which I just loved. I was talking to a journalist, and I was telling her this. I was saying, "Oh, what are you reading? It's the most amazing question. You got to ask everybody. Ask, what are you reading?" And she said, "I don't know. What if they're not reading anything?" I said, "Well, so they're not reading anything. They'll tell you. That's not a problem." But I said, "Just try it. If you're taking a taxi home from this talk," I said, "ask the cab driver what she or he is reading." So she promised me. She said, "Okay, I'll do it." Well, she called me the next day. She said, "You won't believe what happened." I said, "What happened?" She said, "I got into the New York taxi, said to the cab driver, 'What are you reading?' And all of a sudden, he veered over, pulled the car to a stop, and started getting misty-eyed. And he couldn't drive. He was so emotional. And he said, 'I'm a professor from Egypt. I'm here as an immigrant. I'm driving a cab, and no one ever asks me anything other than where are you from, and where's the best Egyptian food, and how come the fare is so expensive, and all these things.' And he said, 'I'd love to tell you what I'm reading.'" And then he told her, and they had a long chat about books. And then he said to her, "Well, why'd you ask?" And she said, "Well, I was talking to this author, and he has a book." And he said, "Who published the book?" And she said, "Knopf." And he said, "Oh, that's the house that's headed by Sonny Mehta, and I know this," and he knew all the editors, just as a sort of follower of publishing. And she wrote that up in the New York Times to publish that story. And she said, "I'm never again going to stop myself from asking someone, 'What are you reading?'"
When you talk about books, you light up. You do. Where does your love of reading come from?
Comes from a pretty obvious place, which is I was one of the really lucky kids who had parents who read to us, which is an amazing gift. And every one of us who had that is so blessed. And it's also, I think, where my love of conversation about books comes from. Because that way that when parents read to kids, it's not reading to the kids, it's a dialogue. So the parents trying to get through the book and go to sleep. But the kid's like, "Why is the fire truck red? And where's the dog? And why is the man holding a balloon?" And that's what I remember from my earliest memories is not just being read to, but the conversations about books and how important those are. So it comes right from that. But it also then evolved. Because I think my parents were incredibly clever. And one of the ways they got us to read is by telling us books were too old for us.
Then you really wanted them.
Yeah, so Fear of Flying by Erica Jong. It was too old for us, by the way. John Updike's Couples, the autobiography of Malcolm X, they kept sort of pronouncing, they'd put a book on the shelf, and you'd say, "What's that?" "It's too old for you," and we devoured them. And that also got me to see that books can be dangerous, and they can do things, and they can be exciting, and they can be controversial, that they aren't just this thing that takes you away from life, they're things that helps you engage. So that I think was another turning point.
The book that you come back to the most in Books for Living is The Importance of Living. And it is by a Chinese scholar in the 1930s, right?
Yep.
Lin Yutang. And I had never heard of it, but now it's part of my collection because
Great.
I just ordered everything. But I want you to let people know why this is so important to you, the life lessons that it taught you.
This is such an amazing book. Just show of hands, who here has heard of The Importance of Living by Lin Yutang?
Yeah, I hadn't either.
So we've got
a couple.
3 or 4. Lin Yutang was the most popular author of the late 30s, globally. I mean, he was sort of Tuesdays with Morrie on steroids. I mean, everybody read Lin Yutang. And the way I came to it was, and one of the things I love writing about is the weird way that the universe puts books in front of you. And you just have to be attuned to it. At about the same period that Miss Locke was putting Giovanni's Room on a library cart for me, I saw the movie Cabaret. And as did so many of us, I fell head over heels in love with Michael York, the incredibly handsome actor who starred in it. And that led me to curiosity about cabaret. So I looked up the author of the original novellas on which they were based, Christopher Isherwood, and he became my favorite author, so I read tons of Christopher Isherwood. And then I thought, I want to learn more about the 1930s. There's a long way of getting to this. And I kept coming across this name, Lin Yutang, The Importance of Living. The book had been out of print for 30 or 40 years by the time I discovered it. I found a copy in a library, and I thought it was just the most magical book. It's very dense. It's a book explaining Chinese philosophy to Western readers. It's dense in terms of the number of pages and the stuff packed in it. It's totally delightful to read. I mean, it couldn't be easier or more fun reading. And it's about a really powerful theme, which he calls the noble art of leaving things undone. And it's about the importance of napping, of lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, of taking nature walks, of hanging out with your friends, drinking tea, and reading. And at first, when you're reading this book, and he quotes Chinese philosophers on these subjects, and these wonderful digressions on everything. And at first I was thinking, this is so charming, and this is such a wonderful lesson. And then I realized that he was doing something really much more serious than I thought. Because as you read along in this book, and bear in mind, it was written in 1937, he starts talking about Hitler and Stalin. And he starts talking about the greed and ambition and drive for power that he sees across Europe and Asia. And he contrasts the life of the napper, the reasonable person, the reader, the conversationalist, the humanist, with the lives of the people, communists and fascists, who had this inexorable drive for power and domination. And so by the time you get to the end of this long, chatty book, you realize that he's really warning about values and about humanistic values and about how much trouble the world will get into if we turn our back on them. And so not only was it an incredibly prescient and important book in 1937, I really feel, hello, exactly, hello.
Right now.
Right now. And he even has an absolutely breathtaking passage about what happens when a demagogue comes into a country and appeals to people's baser instincts and appeals to their racism and appeals to their anger. 1937. He also has some funny things too. I have to add, one of my favorite things in it is he talks about this famous tea house in China, and he said that it's really irritating to go there because it's the best tea house in China, but people are so busy taking pictures of themselves drinking tea that they don't even enjoy the tea. And I thought, well, that's...
2017.
Yeah.
Yeah. Selfies and everything else.
Exactly.
You know, I read Stuart Little to my kids, you know, and my parents read it to me as a kid. And this is what I like so much about this book, the diverse books that you have in it. From Girl on a Train to Stuart Little, but I want to focus in on Stuart Little for a second and the lessons that that book taught you. Why did you include it?
Well, it was my favorite book as a kid, and I loved it unreservedly, loved Stuart, and in fact I tell this story about loving Stuart so much that I begged my parents to buy me a rodent. The rodent of the moment was a gerbil. Yeah. The gerbil bit me. I ran away from home because I felt so betrayed. But that did not lessen my love for Stuart.
Was your gerbil well dressed?
Not nearly as well dressed as Stuart. Stuart was so natty. I really admired that. He was a dresser.
Yes, he was.
So, I mean, at the time, I just loved it. And then, over the course of writing this book and in the years following loving it, I realized a couple things about it that I think are really remarkable. One is that it really is a tale of radical acceptance. That Stuart's family is a human family, and they give birth to a mouse. And they love their mouse son unconditionally. And I was reading a wonderful book by Andrew Solomon called Far from the Tree, And he talks about horizontal identities versus vertical identities. And vertical identities are the identity you share with your parents. And a horizontal identity is something you share with another group. So for example, he'll write about deaf children of hearing parents, and the experience of being part of deaf culture is something that you share with people across many families. It's not something you share with your parents. It's a horizontal identity. And I thought, wow, Stuart Little is a book about horizontal and vertical identities and parents who accept their children unconditionally. And it also is a book, and this is, I think, the most moving thing about it, about searching. And E.B. White, when he wrote it, took a lot of flack because, sorry, this is a tiny bit of a spoiler alert, but I assume everyone's vaguely familiar with Stuart Little. Margalo the bird, who has saved Stuart's life, has to flee because of the horrible cat, and Stuart goes off in search of her, and at the end of Stuart Little, he hasn't found her. He's searching. And people said to E.B. White, you can't write a children's book that ends on such an inconclusive note. And he said, I really want children to know that it's really about the searching, and whether he ever finds Margalo or not.
I love that.
Doesn't matter. The point is, he's looking for her. That's his life's work.
Love it. I love that. I wondered as I was reading this book whether you're thinking about your mom, because end of life, and then books for living.
Yeah, very, very much. And not just my mom. One of the things I really wanted to do in this book, and we were chatting a little bit about this too, is there are portraits throughout of people I've loved who have died. So when I read The Little Prince, it brings back a wonderful classmate I had sophomore year who died of cancer, sophomore year of high school, a girl named Lee Harkins. David Copperfield is connected to a great friend I had named David Baer, who was killed in a freak accident 2 years after college. I have a chapter on AIDS, and an extraordinary book called Gifts of the Body by Rebecca Brown, and how I came of age during that period and working on a hotline for people with AIDS, but long before there was a test, and the idea of the sort of grief overload and all the people who didn't make it to today. That book is tied with that. And in many ways, all of the books and the whole enterprise is connected with my mother too, because she's the one who gave me my love of reading. And the question that I really try to grapple with is, what can we do for the dead? What can we do for them?
That's a big question, Will.
It's a big question. And one of the things that I decided that we can do for them is we can read for them. We can read books we think they might have liked. We can read books we know they loved. And when we do that, we can remember their lives. And I use the analogy with David Copperfield, that I was just distraught when I finished David Copperfield. I was a teenager. I was so wrapped up with David and Dora and Steerforth and little Emily. And I thought when I turned that last page, I thought, I'll never be able to spend time with them again. Like, that's the end of my relationship with them. And I later realized, no, that was the beginning of my relationship with them, that I have a lifelong relationship with those characters. And when I wrote about David Copperfield in the book, I wrote, I get to choose whether I remember reading the book or finishing the book. And I choose reading, and I describe it as I choose life. And when I think of my friend David Baer, I can think of his death, or I can think of his life, and I choose life. And I feel like when you do that, you keep them present, and that remembering is very sweet, forgetting is very sad, and the remembering allows you to do something, and again back to this question of meaning, something very specific, which is not just what would they read, but what would they do? How can you honor their legacy, and how can you continue their work? And that's one of the things I want to do in the back nine, is I want to live for the people who are no longer here to live for themselves.
Are there lessons in books that aren't so great as well?
Oh, yeah. You mean the book's not so great?
Are the bad books worth it? Do they
Oh,
teach
yeah.
us something? What do they teach us?
Well, there's a quote I love. Pliny the Younger said, "There's no book so bad that there's not something in it of value." And I couldn't resist adding the thing that clearly he had not read some of the sex and shopping novels of the early 80s that I read, and I will not call out those authors by name, but you know which ones I'm talking about. But I think that it's amazing. Our minds are unbelievable things, and they pick up nuggets everywhere. And so you never know where a little nugget of wisdom is going to come. And even when you're reading a book that's bad or that's muddy, it's badly written, it's annoying, you get some insight into sort of how people can be annoying. If you're reading something crass, it reminds you that people can be crass. And that's all valuable stuff. That's all worthwhile.
You've said that with reading comes responsibility. What does that mean?
That's something I really learned from my mother. My mother, for those of you who read the End of Your Life book club, was a refugee advocate in the third act of her life when she hit her 50s. And she would talk about books like the extraordinary Khaled Hosseini books. And she would say that if you read a book like The Kite Runner, and you closed the book, and if you were moved by it, it wasn't enough just to be moved. That you now knew something, you felt something, you had to do something about it. You had responsibility. And maybe you could find out about refugees from Afghanistan in your community and invite them to Thanksgiving dinner. Or maybe you could write a letter to an elected official urging them to pay more attention to policy, or send a check to an organization, or even just not pass those stories in the newspaper and take the time to educate yourself. But she felt to honor the writers we love, if they move you, act on it. And in not just cases like that, when we read Jhumpa Lahiri, again, one of my favorite writers, and writing about the struggle, one of her great topics, I think, is the struggles that older immigrants have when their children adapt to the new culture, and they're having more trouble. And just, could you be kinder in line when the person in front of you, who's not yet fluent in our language and may never be, is having trouble ordering? Could you just take a minute and help them? Because if you can do that, that's reading with responsibility.
So many books have clearly impacted you, and you have talked so much about the importance of living and told everybody why. But is it your favorite book?
No.
That's what I want to get. So impacting is one thing, but what's your favorite book?
So it's funny. Lin Yutang, in The Importance of Living, has a riff, which I love, which is, he says, one of the great tasks for a human being is to identify your favorite author. And that's sort of part of our life's work, is to figure out who our favorite author is. And it can change, and that's why part of your life's work. But mine has been fixed and absolute, and it's Christopher Isherwood, the man who wrote the novellas that were made into cabaret. He wrote so many other extraordinary things. Throughout my life, I've turned to him again and again. Christopher and His Kind, which is his autobiography, is probably my single favorite book, but I think of all of Christopher Isherwood as one. And I actually called Christopher Isherwood once.
What was that conversation like?
It was 1982, so I was 20 years old. I think he was already in his early 80s. He was in the phone book, so I just looked up Christopher Isherwood, Santa Monica, California. And I said, hi, Mr. Isherwood, I'm your biggest fan. I've read all your books. And he was so sweet. He said, I'm not feeling very well today, but why don't you come say hello sometime, stop by the house and come see me.
Did you?
No. I never called him again. I got too shy. But and in some ways, I didn't want to. I love that I know him only through his books. But actually, maybe it would have been cool. Who's your favorite?
John Irving.
Oh,
A Prayer for Ellen Meany is my favorite book. And I love it. And when I had the opportunity to interview him, I was a bumbling idiot. It was something. I got through it somehow, but what a gracious man and lovely man, and he let me hold his Oscar. It was in his apartment, he let me hold it. He was amazing.
That's an
But
amazing
I
book.
love A Prayer for Ellen. I know you do.
Yeah?
I know you do. And that's another reason why I like you. I went, A Prayer
Mind
for Ellen.
meld.
Oh, look at that. Want to talk a little bit about the books that didn't make it into this? Because I was thinking a lot about that. I thought, oh my goodness, there are only so many chapters. And I love the diversity of the books you chose, but what was maybe on the short list and didn't make it in?
So tough.
I bet, especially for someone like you.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you leave out?
Well, there are 26 chapters, and the reason I chose 26 is if someone did care to spend a year reading these books, that's one every 2 weeks, which I think is sort of manageable. Because some of them are short, some of them are long. I have a weird habit as a writer, which is I don't know that I've written a horrible chapter until I get to the very end. It doesn't, I'm in love with my chapter until I put the last word on, and then I read the chapter and I go, wow, that's stupid. And so I probably wrote, there's 26 chapters in this, I probably wrote 30 to 40 chapters.
Really?
Whole chapters, a whole nother book that didn't make it in. And one of my criteria was, if it was a book that was important to me, even the most important book to me, if I couldn't figure out a way it might be important to someone else, then I let it go. That I really wanted this to be about books that had found me at a time when I really needed them, but I thought might find someone else at the same time. And we got down to the very end, and actually we were at 27 chapters. And I had a chapter on a Tolstoy essay, which is the essay, What Then Must We Do? An amazing essay. And it was the last chapter. And I have a wonderful editor, and he said to me, do you really want that to be the last chapter? And I said, no, I suppose it could be a chapter in the middle. And there's a pause. Then I was like, this chapter shouldn't be in here at all, should it?
I love that that's how he started the conversation.
Yeah, and he's like, no. He said, you're reaching. So I said, okay, I'll pull that one out. And that was the last to go. But I don't regret any of the chapters that I cut. And in fact, some of them were really bizarre. Like, I don't know what I was thinking when I was writing those chapters.
Well, you get passionate about the books that you read, right? And that's the thing.
Yeah, there was, lots of weird chapters. There are books that just for me had to be in there. Lots of them, but one of them was Hanya Yanagihara's A Little Life, which I just read in the last couple of years. It only came out in the last couple of years.
Tell us more about that.
That, more show of hands, has anyone read A Little Life? Oh, a lot of people, good, quite a few. It's an absolutely devastating book about 4 college friends, and it follows their lives from right after college into early middle age, and one of them is the victim of really horrific childhood sexual abuse. And it's his backstory being revealed and how he does everything he can to keep his friends from helping him, and how they sometimes succeed and sometimes fail in staying involved in his life and trying to be there for him. And for me, it's the most beautiful book ever written about friendship. And so that had to be.
It's real.
It's real.
Yeah, it's real.
It's real.
You say that the last word in a book can tell you what the book is about. And I thought, really? So I started looking at books and the last word. So the last word of Will's book, let me turn to it now, is life.
Is life.
Is life.
Yeah. That someone taught me that. I can't remember who taught me that, but that when an author really tells you what the entire book is about in the last word. And it's eerily true tons of times. So I went through my shelf and I read the last words, and about 80% of the time it was like, yep, that word is what this book is about. And so it was ever so slightly contrived because I wanted life to be the last word. And at first it wasn't. In the galley that you're reading, actually, dead was the last word.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I couldn't figure out a way around that. And then at the very last second, I thought, I have a credo, and I'm just going to put that in. And that credo is, I read to live, I read for life. And that's how I decided to end the book.
You know, I said to Will earlier, I got the uncorrected proof because I had to read it and wanted to read it before the interview, and I won't give it up because I love it so much. I've marked it up all over the place. And he said, well, you should get a new copy. I said, I don't want the new copy. I just want this. And I want to keep it with me. There's so much in here, so many questions. But I have to say, it came at a time, you get what you need, and you were talking about that. And it came at a time for me when I was going through a huge transition. And so every single chapter, maybe you'll find that every single chapter gave me something. I was cleaving onto every lesson. Can you tell us the lesson of Girl on a Train?
Girl on a Train has a very special lesson for me. And it's a lesson related to one of the themes that I come back to again and again and again in this book. And that theme is our relationship to people in a world of social media. And I start the chapter on Girl on the Train saying, I have 2,700 friends on Facebook. Now, clearly, I do not have 2,700 friends. And in this world of hyperconnectivity, who do you trust?
Who's in your corner?
Who's in your corner?
Yeah.
And it's very practical on things. Someone, can you recommend me for a job? I would love to stay in your apartment. My kid wants this. So we're asking for things all the time as friends, but not friends like we used to have friends. And at the time I was pondering that, I was reading Girl on the Train, which I loved. I think it's really smart. And there are 3 narrators, and the main narrator is an unreliable narrator, or at least a possibly unreliable narrator. And one of the things that makes her so fascinating is that not only does she not know who she can trust, she's not even sure she can trust herself. And then I started to look at myself and my 2,700 friends a little differently, which is, okay, yeah, a lot of them I can't trust, and thrillers are great because they help me figure out what makes someone trustworthy. But also, boy, I can't trust myself a lot of time. And I realize this especially when I'm hanging out with my husband, and he'll say, that dinner we had with, Fred and Jerry, and I'll say, no, it wasn't Fred and Jerry, it was Tom and Phil. And he's like, no, it was Fred and Jerry. And I'm like, no, it was Tom and Phil. And I'll say, he's not even here, but I would say he's right most of the time. So this thing about who do you trust, and one of the things I think thrillers and suspense books do is they allow us to increase our skill. But I do end that chapter with one sort of piece of advice which I've learned from thrillers, and I take to heart, which is the one person you must never trust is the person who says, trust me.
Absolutely. That's the truth.
That's the truth.
You can trust me.
You can trust me.
Famous last words.
Yeah, it's like when
for the
people
person
say,
on the other
when people say, when you're talking, they say, can I be honest? And you're like, what is you've been lying to me the entire time?
Exactly.
Sure, go for it.
Exactly. Are you thinking of something new, Mr. Will Schwalbe? Of course you are.
Yes.
What are you working on?
Well,
can you mention?
I can't mention it specifically.
Am I pressuring you?
But I'm really super excited about it. And I'll just give you a hint
Please.
What it's about.
Breaking news.
Which is, I have a friend who's been a friend since college. And we're just such dear friends. I'm nuts about this guy. And we are totally and completely different. We're from different backgrounds, different politics, different everything. And this is one of my dearest friends. And it's some interesting ways how different he is. But I really want to write about friendships across differences. And I feel like that's something that we need to write about now more than ever. But of course, it has a lot of books in it, and there's some books that I'll be including and all of that. But to me, that's something, I love the idea that we can change each other. This isn't one of those friendships where someone has a hateful ideology. This is something where over 30 years, we've both changed each other's minds about things. And to me, that's the story I really want to put out now.
Okay, one more question, because this is so intriguing. Will we hear both voices, yours and his?
Oh, yeah.
So we'll hear from him, we'll hear from you, and some back and forth.
I'm writing it, but I'm writing it, and it's about him, and it's a collaboration. But I'm writing a book.
This is fantastic. We're now going to open it up for questions. I hope you have some for the amazing Wilshvavi.
So I just love your ask someone what their reading question is. I have a bit of a different take. In my house, my husband is not a voracious reader. I'm the voracious reader. But he loves music. And so one time he was being interviewed and he was asked, what are you reading now? And he said, I'd like to turn it around. I'd like to tell you what I'm listening to now. And we'd been married 20 years at that point, and that was the first time the penny really dropped for me, that his passion was listening to music and my passion was reading. So I love asking that question, but if it veers in a bit of a different direction, I still think that's a great question.
Oh, I totally agree. I think that's fantastic. I think what are you reading is the question that is really asking someone exactly that. What are you passionate about now? Or what are you involved in? Or what's taking up your time? And what do you want to share with me? What do you want to tell me about?
Thank you.
There's got to be more questions in this room. I have a room full of books, and I can't seem to finish one without starting another, and often I end up just losing track of the ones I've started and taking them back to the library without finishing them. And I just wonder what you think about people who read books, maybe read 100 pages and then stop. Is that worthwhile, or is it a waste of time, or is it insulting to the book itself?
No, it is not. I mean, I think that one of the greatest things I think about books is by only reading a part of the book, you have not harmed that book in any way. That book is fine, it will be fine, and you get to read it however, whenever you like. And that's the genius technology of books.
I'll ask one last question. What are both of you reading right now?
I am just finishing up Swing Time, and I will be starting we have a book club actually on the social, so we'll actually be talking about Swing Time tomorrow. And I will be starting Hidden Figures right after that. What about you?
Well, so this morning on the plane flying here, I finished a wonderful, wonderful book called The Golden Age by Joan London. And she's an Australian novelist. I'd never heard of her before. The reason I found her was I walked into a great indie bookstore, and you can do the same thing with the library. And I always do this. I just put myself in the hands of the bookseller, and I say, I'll buy whatever you tell me to. Just give me a book. And she gave me this book, and I didn't really love the flap copy, and I didn't really love the cover, so I wouldn't have bought it. But it's the story, it's a love story of two young people, 13 years old, in a home for children with polio in Australia. And one of them's family are refugees from Nazi Europe. And it is so tender and beautiful and moving. I just loved it. So I finished that and then immediately started a book called The Dry, which is also set in Australia. I don't know what it is with me in Australia at the moment. And it's by a woman named Jane Harper. And I'm really just a couple pages in. But when I go back tonight, I'll be further. What are you reading?
I am reading a dual biography of Leni Riefenstahl and Marlene Dietrich right now. That's quite interesting. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.